Greetings and welcome to another episode of Bobolog. This is episode 14 and today I have to share with you one pattern that I have been eyeing, one finished object, 2 works in progress, 3 Multicrafty projects, and I will also be having a bit of a chat about yarn and stash. So let's get to it. My name is Bobolog and this is my vlog where I come to share my knitting and crafty endeavors with you. You can also find me on Instagram at Platypus Knitting, and I am on Ravelry under my own name, Bobolog, and I would love to see you or hear from you on either of those platforms as well as here on YouTube. All of the projects that I will talk about and anything that I mention will be in the YouTube description down below. If there is anything that I have missed or if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below or shoot me a message on Instagram or Ravelry. I live in Victoria with my partner. We are on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and I would like to pay my respects to them and their elders, past, present, and future. To get started, I will just begin with a little bit of admin. So if you are returning, you may have noticed that the last episode, episode 13, I split up into 2 parts because I had realized that my episodes were getting quite long. My preference is for them to be a bit on the shorter side, at least under 1 hour, but ideally half the length that they have been lately. So I split the last episode into 2 parts. I did find it a bit confusing and I didn't like doing it as much though, so I will now be trying something different. I will try instead to actually be brief in what I say and a bit more succinct in how I explain things, and I will also just edit a little bit more stringently, so hopefully that will be enough to cut these episodes down to a decent length. But if you have watched from the start, then you may notice that it's a little bit different from now on. Hopefully it's just cleaner and tidier and you find that enjoyable and that works for you. I will start off with just a little bit of chatter about things of significance that have gone on in my personal life. Not really things of significance, more like things that I have done that I just thought I'd share. I don't do much. I am an introvert, and of course all of the lockdowns and all of the situation with the pandemic over the last few years has really heightened that. So I don't often have all that much to share in this catch up. But one thing that I did do since I last recorded is I went and saw Moulin Rouge, the musical, in the city. My sister who lives in London actually got that for me as a Christmas present last year. And I was meant to see it with her then in December when she was down. Unfortunately, she had booked the tickets for when Omicron was starting to ramp up, and I wasn't comfortable going out to a theatre, and very sadly I told her that I wasn't up for attending the show with her, so she just rescheduled it for another time. And sadly, I couldn't see it with her, which is of course part of the present, but I still got to see it. I took a friend with me, and it was a lot of fun, but I don't think I would want to see it again. The last musical that I saw in a show before that was Come From Away, and that one I saw twice, and I would have happily gone back to see it more and more times, but that would have been spending quite a bit of money. So this one I have to say I didn't love as much. The fun in it is that it used a lot of pop songs, so that just automatically sort of makes it enjoyable if you like pop music, which I do. So having the familiarity with those songs and having them presented in that setting was entertaining. But I do have to say I liked the story from the movie much better. I didn't necessarily appreciate how they changed it for the musical production, but that's just my opinion of it. The only other thing I have to say about that is it is definitely the biggest thing that I have done in a long time. It's the furthest, I guess you say, it's the furthest I've ventured out into the public in quite a while. And I was really surprised to see what the crowds were like, because I don't go out, and I know that people have been, but it was like pre-COVID times. There were just crowds, people jammed in, the bars were spilling out, and I was not expecting it. I was running late to meet my friend for dinner before the show, so I have to say I didn't take as much care to physically distance that I normally do, because I was rushing to meet her. But yeah, the crowds were just really unexpected. I mean, in a way, it's definitely nice to see that happening, but me being me and me being how I have been the last couple of years, I wasn't completely comfortable with it. Having said that, I still chose to not wear a mask in the theater, even though it was a full house. So, and nothing happened, and I'm fine. Didn't get COVID, so that's that, I guess, and that's a good thing, obviously. And I guess that's kind of like the only real thing I've done that isn't sort of, ordinary going about my life. So I guess I will move on to eye candy. So the pattern that I have been eyeing, actually, I will start off by talking about how I found this pattern. So when I was editing the episode that went out last week, which was mainly me talking about my experience doing a natural dyeing workshop at Tandy, I just got really excited about using that yarn. I just was reminded, I mean, it had only just happened, so it's not like I had forgotten about the yarn, but it just reminded me how beautiful it was, and I was just so inspired to use it. And I had thought going into the workshop that I would come out of it with yarn that would be marked as that special yarn that just has to wait for that special project and just ends up sitting in your stash for a really long time. But like I said, when I was editing last week, I was just so inspired to use it that I actually I stopped editing a couple of times just so I could search on Ravelry, and the search features and the filters on Ravelry are just so brilliant. They make it so easy to really refine what you are looking for. So one of the searches that I did was looking at patterns that are in my library, because I'm making an effort to not spend money on patterns when I have so many already. Of course, I will still buy patterns because there are so many that I like that I don't yet own, but my preference is to try to find something that I want to make in my pattern stash first and to knit from my pattern stash. So the yarns that were produced in that workshop included 3 different colors of fingering weight yarn. So they are these ones here. And this set I really especially love, and I knew I wanted to use them together because this color here and this color here are the same colors that were used to dye this. the green is the yellow and the brown is the orange. It's just a different color because this one was then over dyed or dip dyed in indigo, which produced completely different colors. And I love that. I think it's just basic color theory really, but it's beautiful. So of course I wanted to try to use these together. So in Ravelry, I searched for patterns in my library that used somewhere around 300 meters of yarn, because I'm guessing that's what I have. I weighed these and then I looked at the meterage of a full skein of Tandy's 4-ply yarn, and I put in Ravelry the weight of these, but said that one full skein was whatever Tandy's normal meterage is. So for me, that was just the best way to guess how much I actually have. So I put those search parameters into Ravelry, a pattern in my library using 3 colors, and it pretty much only gave me one result that I thought was appropriate. But I'm really quite thrilled with it actually, because it is in this Knitting Magic book by Tanis Gray that I was given for, I can't remember if it was a Christmas present or a birthday present, but it was a present from my crafty aunt, who I've mentioned in previous episodes, who's just a whiz at all crafts. So she gave this to me a while ago, and I haven't made anything from it yet. So the pattern that came up in the results is this one here. So this is Luna's Spectrespecs gloves, designed by Stephanie Lotvin. So my initial idea was to use the variegated color as the main color, as the background color, because it kind of just makes perfect sense that this one, which uses both of these, is in both gloves, and then that these provide the contrast color. I forgot to mention earlier, I'm not sure if you can hear the construction that's going on, but sorry about any extraneous noise that might come through. They're dismantling a carport next door, I think. Anyway, so that was my original plan for the colors for the gloves. However, yesterday I caked them up, and then I took a black and white photo, which I'll put up here. And as you can see, which I suspected anyway, the contrast doesn't really work out in the way that I had planned to use it. So previously, before I had done the black and white photo, I knew that the pattern wasn't going to come out as cleanly as the gloves, particularly because one of the yarns that I'm using is a variegated yarn. But my justification for that was just that these are Luna's mittens. These are something that are going to make me really happy, and Luna would approve of that, and it's being creative and playful. So I was completely fine with that until I took the black and white photo and I saw how similar the variegated and the orange actually are, and how much of a contrast the yellow provided. So of course I was torn. I know in my heart of hearts that it will look best to use the yellow as the background color and to have the orange as the main contrast on one glove and the green and brown as the main contrast on the second glove. But I was torn because I really like the idea of using the colors in the way that I explained just before. So I have put it out to my knitting group, and I've asked my crochet friend Hannah, who I also like to call my color guru. So far, the response has just been that I'm better off really going by contrast, but at the same time, I should do what makes me happy. But honestly, as much as it would please me to have that variegated skein as the background in both gloves and have it make sense in that way. I do think I would be happier and use them more if I do have something that contrasts better and therefore looks better. What I really should do that Mel from Three Cats Yarns suggested is I should swatch, but I can't be bothered. I'm being lazy. I'm usually a really good swatcher, but for these I can't be bothered. But I think I will try to do a faux swatch, and if I do that, I'm going to try to do just a mini tutorial for it. So we'll see how that goes. So that is the pattern I am looking at in Eye Candy. To continue on with that theme of using my naturally dyed yarns, but moving on to Handy Dandy, you may have noticed that I am wearing this beanie that is also made out of yarns that were naturally dyed at that workshop by Tandy. So I am super happy with this beanie. This one is made in 8-ply yarn. So out of the workshop we got 3 4-plies, 3 fingering weight yarns and 2 DK weight yarns. So with this one, obviously I searched again by a rough meterage, 8-ply and something that used 2 colors, and I came up with a few options for this one, but I liked this pattern the best. So this is the River's Hat by Alice Caetano. I'm sorry if I have mispronounced that, but the spelling will be in the description down below, and the pattern will be linked as well, like I said before. So this one comes from the Making Forest magazine that I featured in a previous episode. It wasn't actually a pattern that had caught my eye as something I'd actually want to make when I was first looking through the magazine. But when I was looking specifically for something small that used 2 colors, I knew that this one was perfect. One reason for that is because it looked like it would need almost double the amount of one color as the other color. And thanks to one of the lovely women who took the workshop with me, Judith, I actually did have double the amount of one color than I did the other color. This green and white color that's on the brim here is actually Judith's yarn. My version of this was a lot more white than green, and I had told her that I thought hers was really nice, and she said she doesn't knit with DK yarn and that I could have it. So I thought this hat was just perfect. So what I did is I did the brim completely in her color, which is more of the green. And then once this patterning started, I was alternating between her green and my whiter green mini skein of yarn. So it kind of fades up, and then about halfway through the pattern, her green one ran out and I was just using mine. I do have to say that the indigo, the blue is the indigo. I didn't follow the pattern exactly, getting towards the top of the crown, where about where the decreases start, because it wanted to use a bit more of the contrast color than I ended up using, because I knew that I wouldn't have enough. So you can see here that it's pretty much just the blue and white in the center, and there should be more indigo in there. But I think it doesn't look like that color is missing, and I'm really happy with how this hat has turned out. One thing that I want to mention, it got quite warm. I think you can see the sun has come in while I was talking, and it's quite warm now. So one unexpected thing about this pattern is I actually also really love the inside of it. I think that texture is also really pretty. So I may even also wear it inside out, because I think that works really well as well. So yeah, I guess it just depends, you know, what I'm feeling when I want to wear it. But that is the Rivers hat, and I'm really, really happy with that. So I cast that on at some point last week, and it didn't take me too long to do. So that is a completely new project and a finished object there. In part 1 of episode 13, I believe it was part 1, I talked about how I had made the Greenwich sweater by Martin Story for my sister in London. I made it for her at the start of last year, and I made it to pattern, which had a cropped front and a much longer back, and it was quite a big difference in the pattern, which I had hoped my sister would like. I felt like it was a trendy, fashionable sort of feature, and I am not a fashionable person by any means. I don't know anything about fashion. That was just speculation on my part. But she's much more fashionable than me, and I guess I was kind of just hoping that she would like it that way. But when she was here in December and she tried it on, she did say that it was a bit on the short side for her. So I offered to lengthen it for her. So I did that. The problem is that it is a bottom-up pattern in pieces, so I couldn't just unravel from the bottom and then knit down because it's fisherman's rib, and if there's a way to make it look the same going the other direction, I do not know it. So my options are to see if I can look that up and see if there is a way, or to re-knit the front, because when I grafted it on, it made quite a visible line, unfortunately. So I do think I was able to graft it in pattern pretty well. So what I did on this extra bit that I knit is on the last pass of the fisherman's rib stitch. So it takes 2 rows to do. In the first row, I held it with an embroidery thread of a contrast color, just so I could see exactly how that yarn travels across. And then when I knit the second row of the fisherman's rib, I used a different contrast color in embroidery thread. So when I grafted it, I was able to follow exactly how the yarn moved. So it's grafted in pattern. And then when I cut off the original bottom bit, I left a long tail, and I followed that path again of the stitch pattern on the bottom bit, just to make it a bit more of a solid seam. And because with just the single line of grafting, it was a much more distinct line, I would say, than it is now. I was hoping that by sort of having a double graft, it would help blend it more, and it did, but it's still incredibly obvious. And I did wet block this bit a little bit in the hopes that it would help, but it didn't. And I'm not happy with that. I would not be happy gifting this. So I am just going to have to take out the whole front and re-knit it. So the good thing is I did take extensive notes when I knit this the first time about lengths that I made, how many rows and everything. So I should just be able to take out all of this front bit, pick up from the top of this new bit and knit up again, and re-seam it together. And obviously I will also have to remove the neckband to do that. But I'm pretty sure that that is it, because it is also seamed to the sleeve, so it's not like I have to do anything really complicated there. So that is my progress on the Greenwich sweater. So an unsuccessful surgery, but I enjoyed knitting that the first time around, and I think, you know, it'll be a pretty mindless knit once I have unraveled everything and get back to it. The last handy dandy that I have to talk about is the baby lamb pattern by Lorraine Pistorio, which I started earlier this year, but I haven't worked on it in a little while. I haven't worked on it in about a month, so I haven't had anything to show in the last few episodes, but I picked it up again towards the end of last week and I just couldn't put it down. And I just kept knitting and knitting and knitting. So I think previously what I had done is I had done the 2 front legs and hooves, I had done the 2 hind legs and hooves, and I had just started the bottom, connecting those 2 hind hooves together and starting to shape the bottom of the lamb. So this sheepy stitch marker here, which I thought was appropriate for this pattern, that is where I was when I last showed this to you. So you can see I have knit the whole body now. It's super cute and it's super soft. I was a bit worried that even though I had marked which of these front ones was the left and the right, they look like they're really turned out, and I was worried that I had gotten that wrong somehow. But it is meant to sit kind of like that, and then they do face up. So I paid no attention to the dimensions of it as well, because I wasn't going to try to do a gauge swatch or anything like that for this. It's a toy. I didn't think it mattered too much as long as I was getting a nice tight gauge for the yarns that I was using. But it is bigger than I was expecting, so it's almost going to be as big as the baby that I am knitting it for. So that'll be quite cute to see them side by side and see how it compares in size. So the next thing that I have to do to this is stuff it. I have also started on the head, and I've gotten quite a bit of the way through that. So the body I knit on my Likey circular needles, and the head, because it's a much smaller circumference, I am using my Addy Crazy Trio. So I have used the Addy Crazy Trio needles before. My crafty aunt gave me one in 2.25 millimeter size, and I have to say I didn't love using it. And then I discovered that they have what they call the novel long. And the reason that I didn't like the other ones that my aunt gave me was because holding those small needles wasn't comfortable for me and it hurt my hands. So when I discovered that there was a longer version, I bought a couple of different sizes of those, and they're brilliant. I love them. So not only are they longer, they're also square. And if you saw one of my episodes last year where I bought the 4 square interchangeable needle set, you may be aware that where possible, I will choose ergonomics, and square needles are the best for that. So I was really extra pleased that these are square. My only wish is that they were wooden. They do have bamboo ones, but I don't think they're square. I think they're round. And also I wanted to wait and see how I liked them first before I just went on buying more. And really, I don't need more needles. But anyway, I have digressed too much. So anyway, this is what I have done of the face. So I've started stuffing it because it's going to start decreasing from this point. The eyes are French knots, which I have never done before. So the pattern does suggest safety eyes, but I thought I would prefer to embroider them on. And then this marker here is just denoting where the nose will go. So I used Neville for nose. And I just think that it's going to be so adorable when it's finished. what am I doing? I think it's going to be really cute. It's also got to have some ears, and I believe it has a tail, and I can't wait to finish this one. I would love to have one for myself, but I'm not sure that I would knit it again. And I definitely like the texture of this yarn for it, but I have to say I'm not completely loving working with it. It's incredibly soft, but it is almost impossible to see your stitches. So when working short rows, for example, I find it really hard to see what's going on, and to know what I have done and what I need to pick up to do the shadow wrap short rows that are in the pattern. And because I had done half of the short rows for the bottom before, which got me to this progress marker here, then I put it away for a month, and when I came back to it, I'd sort of half forgotten how the shadow wrap short rows work, and I did read the instructions again, but I didn't read them through properly or something, and I did get it a bit confused. And I know that there must have been a couple of times where I didn't knit the shadow wrap and it's paired stitch together, and I knit them separately because my stitch counts were wrong. But I guess that's also the good thing about this yarn, is it's so easy to hide mistakes in because you can't see. So I just did a couple of knit togethers where I thought they'd be appropriate, and that got my stitch counts back to where they should have been. Yeah. Oh, the other thing that I want to mention about this one is for the legs, I stuffed them using fabric scraps. So I got together some of my fabric scraps of cotton and linen that were in creamy light colors, and I cut them up really small, and I stuffed the legs with that, which worked well. You're meant to stuff it quite firmly, and it is quite firm, but it's a bit harder, I think, than I would have liked. So since I have been spinning lately and trying to use up that crazy amount of wool roving that I have, I realized after I stuffed the legs that I could use that for stuffing, and it is 100% merino, which I probably wouldn't have used for a baby, except that it is completely enclosed, and it's, you know, it's not going to be against the baby's skin, so it shouldn't cause any allergic reactions or anything like that, or any itching if the baby is prone to that. That is my hope anyway. So that's all I have to say about the baby lamb pattern. The next section is stat chat. So this is just a really brief one to say that I have knit 4 different swatches. 1, 2, 3, and now 4. Four swatches, 4 yarns, 9 different colors to make 4 swatches for the one design that I am working on. So that leads into Multicrafty. So although it is knitting, because for me it is more about design, I am counting it as a Multicrafty project. So this is finally actually the yarn that I am intending to create the pattern in. This is Bendigo Woolen Mills Rustic, and I didn't mention that the Greenwich sweater I knit is in the Bendigo Woolen Mills Classic. So this is Rustic, and I hadn't used their Rustic before, and I have to say I love it. I am really into blues and greens, and originally I was planning to get the main color in the blue or the green that the Rustic comes in, and at the last minute I decided that I should step out of my comfort zone and try something different. And I am so much happier with this color than I had expected that I would be. And I really just think that is because of the yarn itself. So how heathered it is, you can see that there is one spot here where it's got like a big nep of the black, but the rest of it is just so beautiful, all the different tones and shades that are in that yarn. So the main color is called Hermitage, and the contrast color is Pebble, and I'm really enjoying how they work together as well. They did have lighter colors, they did have colors that were more white, but I didn't want, although I wanted a strong contrast, I didn't want the most extreme contrast that you could get. So I chose their rustic yarn because it is a hand wash yarn. It's not a super wash. So I was hoping that it would be grippier and better for color work and better for staking than some of their other yarns that I have used before, which are machine washable. In the description on the website, they do say that they've called this yarn rustic because of how the colors are blended together, because it looks more rustic. But like I said, it's hand washed, so I was hoping it would have quite a rustic feel to it as well. And it's actually a lot softer than I had hoped it would be. Beautiful to work with, really nice to work with. It's not as splitty as I have found some of their other yarns, which is excellent. And yeah, it's just really soft and smooth to work with. So then I was concerned that it wouldn't hold up well being staked. So the color work is fine. That's the back of my color work there. And I have never done staking before, and yet I want to use it in this design that I'm creating. So when I did this swatch, I made it in the round, and I had staking stitches so that I could see how that would work in it as well. So I did 5 columns of staking stitches, and then I basted it by hand. I basted it by hand using this reinforcing woolly thread that I got from Sunspun, which is one of my local yarn stores. So it's not a perfect match, but that's pretty good. And I had heard that it was better to go darker than lighter, because they did have a lighter color of this, but it was lighter than this as well. So I went for the darker one. So I basted it by hand instead of basting it using a sewing machine, and then I cut. And there are a couple of spots where I didn't cut carefully enough. So you can see there where it is fraying more than in other spots. There I actually cut through some of the yarn in that basting column instead of in the center column that I was meant to be cutting through. I'm just not paying enough attention, but it has held together. So I basted it, I cut it, and then I gave it a soak, and I gave it like a bit of a swish in the water with eucalyptus in it, and it's held up. I blocked it, I had it pinned out, stretching it, and it has held together, it has held up. So, it's great. And I'm really happy with how that is coming along. So now that I have my swatch in the actual yarn, I should be ready to start writing the pattern, which I will get to sometime this week. The next Multicrafty project that I want to talk about is my spinning. So I took up spinning this year, self-taught, with a lot of thanks to YouTube videos, obviously, particularly to Gillian Eve, who has a fantastic YouTube channel and podcast with a lot of spinning content. She knits and weaves. I think she crochets as well, but I haven't actually seen it, but she is mainly a spinner, and I love her. And yes, so I got my uncle to 3D print me a Turkish spindle as a cheaper way to get started to see if I even liked it. So I have produced one little mini skein of yarn which I spun on this Turkish spindle. So I spun 3 separate singles and I plied them together. So this I am calling my second spin. It will be my second spun yarn. So this beautiful turtle, I am going to try chain plying this one. So I prefer yarns that have at least 3 plies just because I like the characteristics of that yarn better than a 2-ply, and I'm not really a fan of singles, which is why I want to try chain plying, because it's a way of plying the yarn that does give you 3 plies, but you just use the one single to create it rather than having 3 different singles like I did last time. So I just want to see how that works. And this yarn is made out of this roving. So it is mostly all this light gray color. I have about 2.5 kilos left of that from when I bought 15 kilos to make a chunky blanket. But I did also get some little tiny samples in other colors when I was purchasing that yarn. So with this one, I had a go of hand blending one of those samples, which I think was only about 5 grams, with about 15 grams of the roving. So as you can see, it didn't really blend in a lot of places. It stayed separate, but it kind of just mixed it all up so that it was all a bit more random and not just like chunks of one color and then chunks of another color. So I'm happy with how that is looking, and I'm quite keen to see how that will look once it is plied. I do feel like I've finally gotten the hang, sort of a short forward draw, and my yarn is already a lot finer and more consistent than my first attempts, which is really exciting to see. So it still is thick and thin, but there isn't as much variation in the thickness as my first attempt. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm really excited to see what this looks like as a plied yarn. My first yarn that I created, I checked the wraps per inch, and I think the count was producing, I believe it would have been an Aran or a worsted weight yarn. I think maybe Aran, I can't remember exactly. But what I am hoping is to create a DK yarn. So hopefully 3 plies of this creates something more like a DK weight yarn. And I do want to keep doing a few more little tests with different ways of drafting and different ways of plying to see what I like. And then I want to try to produce a sweater's quantity. I still have more of the sample colors. So with the test that I'm doing, I'm going to blend different colors together to sort of help me distinguish which yarn is which once they are all done, and also just because it's fun. And I will keep using the Turkish spindle. I do want to actually take a beginner's spinning course at the Hand Weavers and Spinners Guild of Victoria, but I decided recently that I don't want to take that course until I feel like I'm ready to buy a spinning wheel. That will still be a couple of years off, I reckon, because I don't want to take the course now, which is really using a spinning wheel, and learn how to use that and then not get my own wheel for a couple of years and forget it all and have to do a refresher. So for now, I'm happy with how I'm progressing, trying to teach myself and using this roving of who knows what quality that I already have, and just seeing how that goes. So that's my spinning. The last Multicrafty project that I want to talk about is my crochet project that has featured in the last few episodes. So it is this here, which is huge. It's huge. Oh my gosh. Again, like with the toy, I figured it's a bag. I don't really need to swatch. I'm just going to go for it. And I was trying to use up as much of the yarn I could as possible. So here it is here. That's the front of it with handles. The sides are blue and the bottom is pink. So this is the Boxet Bag by Cal Patch, and it is made using rug yarns that I purchased at a trash and treasure market, and I didn't know what to do with them for the longest time. I had actually put them on Ravelry as will trade or sell, but of course no one was interested in them, not surprising. And then when I decided that I wanted to make this, I thought that those yarns were just perfect for it. So I am calling this my color block box set. The pattern uses colors differently. I think it's really pretty how the colors are used in the pattern itself, but because I was trying to use up yarn and I only had limited quantities, I chose to do it in this color block way. So I used brown as my main color because I had the most of that. I think I had 4 skeins of that. I put pink at the bottom because I'm not a big fan of pink, and I will see that color the least. So I did the bottom first. I did it on a 8mm hook, which is a lot bigger than what the pattern calls for, and I'm also using a lighter weight yarn than what the pattern calls for, all with the aim of trying to use up as much yarn as I could. So after I did the bottom, I did the 2 ends, the blue ends, and then I did the yellow wide ends with the handles. So as you can see, the top of the yellow is just all yellow with no brown because I ran out. I think I had about this length left of the brown, but because I've been making it all match, I didn't want to have a part of a row that had brown in it and the rest yellow. So to make the match, I've just done the top row there completely in the yellow colorway. So at the end of that, I still had some pink left and I still had some yellow left. I didn't have any blue left because I used it all up to make this swatch. So when it came time to seaming it all together, I used the pink on the sides and the yellow to seam the bottom of it. Now, the pattern does also call for doing a row of single crochet around the whole top edge of it once it has all been seamed together. And I was planning not to do that because if I did it in yellow, I feel like that just would have been too much yellow. Yellow's already the dominant color on here. And I didn't want to do it in pink because, like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of pink. And this is already quite prominent and I didn't want to feature the pink any more than that. But I kept looking at it and thinking about it. And what I really would like to do is to have the blue going around the whole top of it. And that way each color is also used in a seam. And then that also helps the blue to become a bit more prominent in this bag because I'm a fan of blue. But I will need to unravel this swatch and I don't need it anymore really, so that's not a problem. It just would have been a pain. And then how much do I unravel to get enough to do this, especially because you need to hold the yarn doubled. So anyway, I'm going to do it. I know that I'm going to be a lot happier with it if I have that line of blue running along the top. And then once I've done that, I am going to chuck it in the washing machine and felt it a bit. Cal Patch called that fulling, and I'm not sure if that's just the term for it in crochet or if it's a different thing, but she had put the sample one in the washing machine a little bit. And like I said, it's huge. It's a lot bigger than I had expected. And on top of that, because I'm using a bigger needle, it is quite a loose fabric, and I would like to full it up a bit more and maybe also shrink the bag a bit too. So I will do that once I have done that row of blue along the top. The only other thing that I really have to say about this is when I was doing the handles, on one of them I accidentally put in an extra stitch, but by the time I realized, I just couldn't be bothered going back and redoing it. I found creating the handle actually a bit fiddly to do. And you can't really tell looking at it. You can't really tell that one of these handles is one stitch wider than the other. So I'm happy to leave that as is. And I am really happy with that project. It has actually really stirred up an interest in crochet for me. I really enjoyed doing this. And I have to say the other couple of crochet projects that I have done in the past didn't give me that same feeling. They didn't inspire me to want to do more of it. They were kind of just like, I want to try this. Let's see how it goes. All right, they're done. That's it. But this one just made me so happy that I feel like I would like to have a crochet project going at all times alongside all of my knitting. So I was really excited about that. And that now is a good segue into my craft for thought, where I want to talk about yarn and stash. I've been catching up on a couple of audio podcasts that I haven't listened to in a long time. The main two that I've listened to in the past are the Stash and Burn podcast and the Yarniacs podcast. And I believe it is, I'm sorry, I can't remember, but one of them has a Love Your Stash. I don't know what you'd call it, but I think every year they do this Love Your Stash thing where you go through your stash and assess all the yarns that you have, whether you still like them, whether you need to move them on because you're not going to use them or they just don't bring you any joy anymore. And it's also about being more mindful of your stash as you're building it up and, you know, making sure that you're creating a stash that you really love. So it was kind of interesting hearing them talk about that again, and just how they were talking about it's okay to get rid of yarns that you just don't love and you're not going to use, and you have no reason to have anymore, which I completely agree with. But I found it really interesting that this rug yarn was exactly that. I did not like having it. I never thought I would find any project to use it in because it is so rough. It's so rustic. It is definitely not next to skin. But then I found this project and it was the perfect match, and it has made me so happy to use the yarn, to see how it looks, and to just create this beautiful object that I have crafted. So there really is something to say about matching yarns to projects, which I understand is not a new thing. There's always talk about, you know, finding the perfect project for that special skein of yarn, like I was talking about with my naturally dyed Tandy yarns, which I'm still amazed that I was able to find projects that I love for them so soon. But anyway, the right project can just really elevate a yarn. And realizing that has just made me so happy. I have destashed yarns previously. I have a cousin in the Philippines who took up knitting a few years ago, and from what I have heard, there isn't a great selection of yarn. There aren't a lot of options that you can get in the Philippines. It's a tropical climate, so I don't imagine that they'd have a big need for wool and that kind of thing. So when I have destashed yarns in the past, I put them all in a bag and give it to my parents for when they are sending over a whole box of items to the family in the Philippines. So I put my yarns in there. I put knitting needles that I no longer use in there, and I think I've given one book as well. So that is how I choose to de-stash my yarn. But I never gave this because I just didn't think it was good enough. I didn't want to just give it to him because I didn't like it anymore. The other yarns that I had given were mainly because either they were leftovers that I didn't think I would ever use, or they were just balls of yarn that I have had in my stash too long and have never found a project for, and I was sick of trying to find the right match for them. So in saying that, it was great to hold on to this yarn because I eventually did find a project for it. I am also completely all for getting rid of yarn that is not appropriate to keep anymore. I am trying to be more mindful of the yarns that I buy. I have purchased quite a bit of yarn recently. I have projects in mind for all of them, and a lot of the yarn in my stash, I still have a lot of leftovers in there, which I have plans for. I have a few sweater quantities that have already been earmarked for specific projects, and because of that, I haven't really been getting a lot of joy from my stash because I don't feel like it's a stash that I can really play with. Until recently, I didn't feel like I had beautiful single skeins or smaller quantities of yarn that I could just, pull out and throw together and try pairing them with different patterns. I see people doing that on other vlogs that I watch, and I hear people talking about it, how they see a pattern that they like and they can just pull yarns from their stash and mix and match this and mix and match that and see what works. And I don't feel like I have a stash that I can do that with. So lately I have been getting a bit tired of my stash, and I am still looking forward to making all of those projects that certain yarns are assigned to. But lately I've just been feeling like I wanted to try to curate a stash that had a bit more allowance in it to experiment, to be a bit more spontaneous with. So I really am trying not to purchase yarns. The yarns that I have bought this year are pretty much all for gifts that I am going to make. That's the other thing as well. Historically, I have been much more of a gift knitter than a self knitter. And lately I have been feeling like I want to knit more for myself. So I just want to have a stash that has a bit more flexibility. I'm trying to not buy yarn unless it's for a gift, but I am planning on doing quite a bit of shopping, we shall see, at the Bendigo Sheep and Wool Show in July, which I have bought a ticket for. I bought a ticket for 1 day of the 3 days that it goes for. I think 1 full day of browsing and shopping really should be enough. I haven't been, it's quite a huge event, so I don't even know if 1 day will be enough for me to see everything, especially if I'm stopping a lot to browse and shop. But I don't want to set myself up for too much and for spending too much, because I also want to be smart about my stash. I don't want to just build up a huge stash for the sake of it. I'm happy with the size of my stash at the moment, so I'm trying to knit from stash, and I'm trying not to let it grow any bigger than it is, which is a good segue into my final segment, Heart Full of Craft, where I share a highlight or something that I am grateful for. So in this episode, I would like to share my gratitude for stash, surprisingly enough. Not just yarn stash, but also pattern stash. I am the type of person who will not purchase an individual pattern until I am actually ready to knit it. So like with the baby lamb pattern, for example, I favorited that, I'm pretty sure it would have been early last year. And even though I knew that a baby was on its way that I would be making it for, I didn't buy that pattern until I had purchased the yarn and was ready to get going on it. But I do like buying pattern books or knitting books that I'm really interested in, and I like getting magazines even if I never knit from them. So like I have said previously, my favorite publication is the making magazines because I feel like it has a really good balance of mainly knitting things, but then also some crochet, some sewing, some embroidery, and I think it's just got a really good mix of crafts. Plus I do like a lot of the patterns that are in it, but if I never knit from some of the issues that I have, I am still really happy to have them on my shelf. So like I said, I am really trying to prioritize knitting from my yarn stash, but also from my pattern stash. So I am just grateful that I am able to have these things to choose from. Even though I just finished talking about how I'm a bit fed up with my stash at the moment, I still have enough stash that I don't need to be buying new things all the time, and I can still find yarns in my stash that make me really happy to work with. And even this, the eyes on this lamb was like this tiny little ball of black yarn that I had left over, so I didn't need to go out and buy a whole new skein of black yarn just to make these two little French knots. So yes, I'm really grateful for my yarn stash and my pattern stash and for being able to pair them together. So I think I have talked enough. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me today. I hope that you've enjoyed what I have to say. I hope that you've gotten something out of it. And I hope that you are all taking care, looking out for yourselves, staying safe, and yeah, like I said earlier, you can also find me on Instagram and Ravelry. There are links in the YouTube description below to my profiles there. So I will see you in a couple of weeks. Fare thee well.